Hello, 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 everybody, and welcome to the Legends podcast. We're late February 2021, and we're about 1 year into the COVID-19 pandemic. And so it's been a really interesting year for everybody. I believe that everybody has stories and I want to tell them, and there are many, many ways to lead a life. And today I'm going to introduce to you an incredible woman, one of my mentors, one of my big sisters, who was an incredible mentor to so many people in Tokyo and now is based in the US. I'm sure she'll tell us more about that. So welcome, 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 Leza Lowitz. Am I saying that right, Leza?
It's perfect. I'm so happy to be here, Sarah.
As soon as it comes out of my mouth, I'm like, wait a second, I don't think I've ever said that before. So there's no possible way to, I've just looked at Leza's Wikipedia page and there's no possible way to give her the introduction that truly she deserves. But what I'm going to focus on is her author's introduction. So Leza Lowitz writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Huffington Post, the Shambhala Sun, Asian Jewish Life, and the Best Buddhist Writing of 2011. Including much, much more than that. She's published over 20 books, including the APALA award-winning YA novel, Jet Black and the Ninja Wind, which she co-wrote with her husband, the best-selling yoga poems, which she co-wrote with her husband, I beg your pardon, best-selling yoga poems, Line to Unfold by, and her most recent, but this isn't her most recent now, Here Comes the Sun, A Journey to Adoption in 8 Chakras. How fascinating. Leza is American. She lived in Japan for many, many years with her husband, and she's now based in the US with her beautiful son. And you can visit her online at lezalowitz.com. But also she started up one of the most popular yoga studios in Tokyo called Sun and Moon Yoga. I've been there many times. I've been very honored to be a guest there. And I like to just throw in a little fun fact about my guests. So fun fact about Leza is this is a weird fun fact to throw in, is that about 2 years ago, I fell into the craziest depression. And Leza was one of the people I reached out to take me for lunch, and she took me for lunch and we had a great conversation. And she's one of those amazing people who's got that brilliant balance between being compassionate, but also fierce. And so I felt very well cared for on that day. And I think I was probably wildly upset because I didn't have my house by the sea at that time, and now I live by the sea. So dreams do come true, and it's always worth reaching out to people who you can trust and who are great mentors and can be, good big sisters to you in your village. So Leza, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy that you're doing this from your beautiful house by the sea. I knew when we were having that lunch that you were going to manifest that, because that's just who you are. You make things happen. So it was just a question of timing, and here you are, and it's so lovely.
Oh, thanks, Leza. So let's kick off then. Let's get into it. So tell me about your ancestry, your background, and your childhood.
Gosh, that's a big
I know
cake to bite off. So my ancestors, my parents are Russian Jews. Their parents were Russian Jews, and they came from Poland, what was then Poland and Russia, and immigrated to the United States around the turn of the century, the last century, 2 centuries ago now. Oh, wow. And my parents were from the Midwest. They lived in the Midwest, in Illinois and Iowa, believe it or not. But when my sisters, I have 2 elder sisters, a year apart, and I were born shortly after that. They moved to the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. So that's where I was born. And then I spent a few years, my father was drafted into the Navy during the Vietnam War. And I spent a few years in Key West, Florida at a Navy base. So I was sort of a Navy brat for a few years. And that was a very kind of influential point in my life in many ways. Key West, Florida, incredible place, very artistic, very atmospheric, a great place to be a kid by the beach. And then we moved to Berkeley, California. So that was in the 60s and 70s. I went to Berkeley High. I was bused into a Black school, and with Kamala Harris, same era, she was a year or 2 younger than me. Mm-hmm. But that whole integration, Black Power movement, as a white kid getting bused into a Black school, which was later named Malcolm X school, so it was quite radical.
Mm.
That really impacted my worldview as well. And then I went to New York. I wanted to be a writer, so I went to New York when I was 18, and I went to NYU for a few years, and I worked there. And then I transferred back to Berkeley and went to UC Berkeley and majored in English. I'd always been interested in Japan. I had a pretty tumultuous childhood growing up in Berkeley. It was a very tumultuous time, and my parents' relationship was very tumultuous. And I had a high school social studies teacher who introduced us to meditation. So it was there that I found some calm and I found some peace. And I later studied martial arts because I was beaten up a lot as a child. And I kind of got tired of it. Thought, fuck this, I have to defend myself, you know? So I started to learn a very intense form of Okinawan martial arts. And that teacher had us chant the Heart Sutra and meditate, which was very unusual. But I didn't know that, you know, you don't know when you're a kid. And so those things, I think, really planted a lot of seeds for me to eventually make my way to Japan and to pursue meditation and yoga practice. And so I think, you know, just the key points of my life, those were hitting those, you know.
Wow, so much in there.
Yeah.
Leza, so much in there. So it's interesting when you were talking about the Midwest and Illinois and Iowa, I was like, I do not relate that to you. When you said you were born in San Francisco, I was like, oh, there it is. That's how I kind of relate to you.
I often wonder, you know, who I would have been had my parents stayed in the Midwest. I would not be this person. I don't know who I would have been, but I know I would not have been this person. Yeah, I think we're really shaped by our environments and the social and political environments and the times in which we grow up. And in my case, it was such a, you know, I mentioned the Black Power movement, but it was also the feminist movement. You know, all of those movements were coming out at that time, the free speech movement, you know, in Berkeley, in the exact place where I was growing up. And it was just a really wild time, full of change and full of possibility and full of, you know, people just breaking old, you know, ways that weren't working anymore or trying to break them and in kind of radical ways. So yeah, I would not be this person. So I'm grateful they left. I mean, nothing against the Midwest, but I'm really grateful that they didn't stay there.
Yeah.
You know,
it's so I've got a couple of questions here. That's really interesting because now I'm seeing the kind of picture of you coming together, that kind of feminist, wild, change, possibility. I see all those things as being really part inherent in the person that I met 10, 15 years ago. You may not know that you met me then, but I certainly knew that I'd met you. So there's two questions. In your imagination, who are you if you'd been raised in the Midwest? And again, nothing against the Midwest, beautiful place. Lots of people come from there. The Obamas, Mrs. Obama. But like, where did, in your imagination, who were you?
Yeah, I've never really gone down that road. I don't know. I mean, it's really hard to answer that question, but what I do know and what I've talked with my son a lot about, because now he's a Japanese boy living in America and, you know, pushing up against walls and conflict, even though it's really challenging, conflict is actually what makes you grow and what makes you break out of these ideas of who you think you are and what you think you're capable of enduring or, you know, dealing with in your life. And it's these situations where you're pushed to your limit that actually you kind of find out what you're made of. And that was my childhood, you know, in every sense. It was my family life, my school life. I mean, there was no place except meditation that was sort of a calm place where I wasn't challenged in major, very extreme kinds of ways. So I think in the Midwest, I don't know that I would have had those challenges.
Yeah.
You know, I might just have I might have find things to rebel against there, but I think it's very hard to separate what's going on in the outer world from how you respond internally and the choices that you make or are forced to make sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting you should say there about how your environment and the time that you're raised in really shapes you as well. So, you know, we often mention on these conversations about, like, I know we had no phones when we were younger. We had one phone, you know, with a dial on it when I was little, and it was expensive. So
Yeah.
you know, how we met anybody, I'll never know. Also, you know, I think about my own childhood. I was raised near Liverpool, 4 miles from Liverpool at the time, when it would have been something parallel to New Jersey, I suppose. The same kind of thing was happening. Docks were closing down. You know, Margaret Thatcher was in power at the same time that Ronald Reagan was in power. It was that era that really shaped me. So there was this kind of paradox of having two female leaders in my country and being like, I can do anything. And plus just watching the deep and fast decline of the environment that I lived in as well. So these things really do shape your worldview and your social justice mind and all these kinds of things. And it sounds exactly like that for you as well.
I think so too, and especially in those teenage years when you're forming an identity or trying to form an identity, and if you're in an environment that's constantly shifting, and that, you know, it's it's interesting. I think you understand on some level, whether conscious or not, that there's very little within your control, and the things that are within your control are really how you think, what's in your mind, and the actions that you yourself can take to respond to what's outside of you, because you cannot really control the outer world. And I think that was impressed upon me really early, which is a key teaching of Buddhism. You know, the idea of impermanence and the idea of non-attachment, you know. But I think viscerally, those things were inherent in the environment in which I grew up. So yeah, it was a great teaching in a way.
Berkeley is a university town, is that right?
Correct.
So is it quite a radical university town? It's like is it Stanford's kind of radical sister? That's how I imagine it. I imagine like Stanford's one of the old schooly places, and then Berkeley's this kind of more radical place.
Well, Stanford and Berkeley have a rivalry,
Yeah,
and you know,
okay.
in the 80s and in, you know, after, well, in the 60s, Berkeley was really the birthplace of the free speech movement. Mario Savio and those people, when in 1968 to protest the Vietnam War, you know, they were taking over the dean's office of Columbia, of Berkeley. In Paris, you had the student riots there too. So it was really a hotbed of activism, and people were not afraid to stand up to the government and say, hey, we're not going to fight this war. You know, we don't. And also the injustice of, you know, the disproportionate amount of African American men that were being sent off to war. And you could get a draft deferral if you had an education, and sort of, you know, all of these injustices, I think, that people were pointing out. And then Berkeley was also the, you know, the birthplace, Oakland, of the Black Panther movement. And Black Power movement. So you had that coming up, and the Nation of Islam, you know, they had, I remember they had like, you know, your basic Muslim bakery, they called it. And I would see all these young African-American men who were wearing white and who were become Muslim, who were working, you know, hard in jobs at this bakery and trying to make something of their lives. And so there was this movement to kind of shift the injustices and kind of, you know, take the reins, I guess, from the military industrial complex that was just, and over the decades after, continued to, you know, initiate war after war after war in America. But the Vietnam War was really the first time that it was televised. It was the first time that we would see men in body bags, people coming home, that you could actually see the effects of war. And it was devastating. So I think the media and this whole thing that came about, you know, Berkeley was just a place where people took a stand, and then it spread like wildfire. And then, you know, over the years, Silicon Valley, where Stanford is located in the South Bay, that area became known for tech. You know, so I think Stanford kind of, you know, was more conservative and not as diverse, honestly speaking, and the population as well. I mean, it was kind of a bedroom community for white people, I guess, initially. Whereas the Bay Area, there had always been Oakland, was shipyards. So a lot of African American families came there in the Second World War to work on the ships, and also Marin County. Chinese, the Asian population, there was a big Chinatown there. So there was a lot more diversity.
How do you think that influenced you, Leza? How do you think that has influenced your worldview and the way that you move through the world?
Well, I think the major impact was, being a white person bussed into a Black school and not really being wanted there, but also seeing the reality that there were real differences in the quality of education and the facilities and, what was available to white people and Black people, and kind of not realizing, literally being bussed down from the hill, into the flatlands, and kind of seeing the disparity. I was really shocked. And then not being wanted, not being welcomed there either. That was also shocking. But then the positive of that was, being exposed to amazing, figures like Maya Angelou came to talk to us when I was in the 6th grade. James Baldwin came to the school. I mean, because the Black African-American administrators of the school understood that, they had the opportunity to empower the children in those communities and to lift them up. And so that was just, I will never forget the sound of Maya Angelou's voice just booming out in this auditorium. And I was just mesmerized, and I wanted to be a writer, I think, in that moment. And, there was a lot of strife, but I felt, and I've written about this a little bit, but I felt in that moment, we were all one. We were all so mesmerized by this person that all of our racial differences, all of our gender, class, whatever, we all came together in this moment in listening to this woman's story. I know why the caged birds thing, which is about her being raped, and not speaking for years. Until she found her voice. So I feel like that gave me an opportunity to first recognize, we didn't call it white privilege then, but recognize how privileged I was.
Yeah.
Recognize, and being a minority in a way. I was a white girl in a Black school, so teaching me compassion and empathy about being other. Yeah. These lessons have stayed with me. It was a difficult time. And then a lot of the kids I grew up with, went to high school with, we, over time became friendly, and we did make a community, but it took a while. Yeah. So I think that all of those, and then moving to Japan later and kind of being other there and marrying a Japanese man and raising a family that was different, I think I was strong enough to do that, and also creating the community at Sun and Moon, and not having to have an agenda for it, sort of trusting that things unfold themselves organically as they need to. And we don't really have control, but we can guide and nurture, ourselves along the way. So I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Perfectly answers my question. It's a beautiful thing, and what I like about the retelling of this story, Leza, is the inherent optimism in it. And I mean optimism, not like jazz hands but positivity. I mean optimism in that you take what is, and then you take the next step forward with it, and then very consciously make it something interesting, something fertilizing or nourishing for the future. And we don't deny or kind of toxically positively gloss over the kind of difficulties, but in our retelling we don't put ourselves as the victim at the center of it, but we understand where we had challenges and how that shapes who we are today. I think that's I really enjoy your retelling of that. I think it really aligns nicely with the coaching mindset as well. And the other thing that I like about the retelling is this: when you said that, like, those people who would challenge you when you were young, or maybe I'm going to just use the word bully, and I can say this in my life as well, is and I've been on both sides of that fence, and I will be very honest about that. Like, I can remember being mean to people at school and replaying those things over and over in my head, and trying to forgive myself for it. And now we're friends on Facebook and we chat away. And the same for the people who weren't very nice to me at school as well. Now we're friends on Facebook and we happily chat away. And it's just that sense of, oh, right, you can actually move on from these things. They actually do, you know, we're not stuck in a moment of time. And sometimes we can get stuck in a moment of time and waste decades of our lives on it. And I think that's a terrible shame. And, you know, so I hope that if anybody's listening can take heart from this, that relationships can change and morph over time. I think that's something I take heart from, and you've beautifully illustrated there, Leza. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And myself as well. I mean, there were girls, I think teenage girls can be really horrible. And I think I was horrible to a few girls that were my friends. And then when I was sort of accepted into the more popular group, I tried to bring them in and they weren't accepted and I had to drop them and I felt horrible about it.
Yeah.
You know, and to this day, I still feel guilty and I've tried to reach out and things like that. But I think the point is as well, you really don't know what somebody's going through.
No.
You know, you really don't know why people act the way they act, including ourselves.
No.
And I think for me, you know, the other thing I kind of touch upon is my parents' marriage sort of fell apart. And my mother was a struggling single mom who was struggling to make ends meet. And my father was off doing his thing. And I was just really kind of abandoned. And so I think I learned early on I kept waiting for somebody to rescue me. And I was a victim. And I was also a victim because I was beaten up. And, you know, I played that victim card and I milked it. And there was a point in my life when I realized this doesn't work for me. You know, there's nobody who's going to come save me. And I was angry and I was bitter and I had to go through that as well. To come to the other side, you know, the only way out is through, right? And I had to be a victim and I had to be angry and bitter and all of those things until I could really kind of cry myself out and say, okay, no one's coming to save you. This is going to be your life. And what the hell are you going to make it? Because no one else is going to help you. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was really a sad point in my life when I really didn't have anybody, but in a way it was a real awakening. Like, you know, you have this gift of life and what the fuck are you going to make of it? You know, like nobody is going to help you until you help yourself. And I remember that moment. I think I was 15 or 16 and I just pulled myself up by the bootstraps and said, you know, like coaching myself, what do you see for the next 10 years? What do you want to be? How are you going to get there? And if you fail, great. But if you don't try, it's a worse failure. You know, I had that understanding because nobody was there for me. So, you know, that woke me up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's so interesting as well. You should say that. I'm interested in. So that was what woke you up. What saved you? Do you think? What saved you?
I had a boyfriend in high school. I can say his name. Shout out to Andy Polk. It was amazing, and he had this amazing family too. A mother who was also a single mother, but she was a concert pianist. She was getting her PhD in musicology. And she said to me, hey, you're smart. Are you going to go to college? Are you applying to college? And I hadn't really even occurred to me. I said, well, I'm probably going to be a secretary, because one thing my mother did tell me, and bless her heart, learn how to type. You're going to need to know how to type, because in my day, that's what you did. You were a secretary, and I can type like a maniac. I mean, I'm a great typist, so I'm really happy to my mom for that. But Sharon said to me, if you want to be a writer, you need to go to New York. That's where writers go, and let me help you with college applications. And, you know, I was very resourceful. So I had this boyfriend who had this amazing family who really saw something in me, and they saw my potential, and they helped me apply. And then I got scholarships. I think I worked 3 or 4 jobs, and, you know, to go to NYU and to leave my family and Berkeley and to see what was out there for me. So that really saved me. Somebody who believed in me, somebody who got me, who saw my potential. And I listened. I think if my mother, you know, unfortunately, mothers and daughters, if my mother had said something like that to me, I might have rejected it. But because it was coming from someone else, I could hear it, and I wanted to be that person that she saw in me.
Yeah, I love that. And I think there's something really important here. It's about mentors and access as well. If you know, if you can see that, you know, if you get that proximity to somebody who's a concert pianist, then you see that potential that could come from you. If you have access to somebody who's going to do a PhD, you have access to that potential as well. And I think it's really important to 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 note that, like, having access to that kind of to things outside of your own worldview is really, really important. And then to listen, and then to take the next actions, of course, as well. But we can only imagine as far as we can see, to some degree. And I'm always asking my clients to get inside their imagination and imagine more, 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 more. Not because we need more, 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 but just so you can, you know, because our imagination doesn't have any limit to it. But
Exactly. And it's a muscle. You have to, you know, work the muscle.
absolutely, you have to work the muscle. And it's really awesome if you have somebody like that woman who can, Sharon, did you say? Shout out to
Mhm.
Sharon as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
Who can be that person for you. I was very lucky in that I used to go to church. I used to be a Catholic when I was younger, so I'd go to church, and in church you have access to everybody in the community, right? And the same, I used to be in a choir here, so I had access to so many people in the community, you know. So you get to see, like, oh, okay, that's possible outside of my, you know, parents' economic and their imagination, outside their imagination. I think that's really important. And the other thing that I love that you said was the only way out is through. And so again, it's really interesting to note, like, but what takes you through there? And sometimes, I mean, I think for me, I went round and then
Yeah.
went forward. And then when I had enough money, I came back to therapy.
Yeah.
So, or coaching as well. For me, like, that combination really worked. So, and, you know, you and I have been, I would say lucky, because going through that is really, really hard. But yeah, like, the through, you need some help on the through sometimes. What do you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah. I think you always need help on the through, but it's hard to ask for help and it's hard to receive help.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and we all have our own time of being able to hear things, you know, and I think every life has its own trajectory and its own course, and the people you meet along the way, and when you have ears and eyes to hear and see them, you know, when you're ready to evolve to the next level is when you can. So
Mm.
um but I feel like also for me, the fact that she saw the potential in me, and she was somebody I respected, and I saw how hard she worked for her art and her craft, and you know, she had the discipline, she had the talent, she had all that, but she also worked really hard. And her son as well, who became an actor, yeah, and he was on Broadway, and yay, Andy. We're Facebook friends. So you know, I think that environment, of that artistic environment as well, and there was always people at their house who were playing, you know, they had like a little orchestra at their house all the time, and they were surrounded by amazing people. And the other people that I met at the time were um, a friend, Julie Litwin, who was a friend of his, whose father was an ophthalmologist, and his father and mother did yoga in India, and they were like these beautiful people, you know, kind of Berkeley hippies, but it just had this aura and this energy. And he started with a group of other eye doctors, something called the Seva Foundation, which the Grateful Dead were involved with, which was basically, you know, taking their medical expertise and going to Nepal and helping people with cataracts, like, you know, setting up a clinic to do eye surgery, and you know, for people in another country, just out of, you know, Seva, which means service. So I saw that as well, and my father is a physician, is a psychiatrist, and I saw that you could have privilege and have an education and have a skill, and then, you know, take that into a community and do something with that. And that was also incredibly inspiring to me. And I didn't realize at the time that those seeds were really deeply planted. But my sister, my eldest sister, Robin, shout out to Robin, is a doctor, family doctor, and she opened a free clinic in Sonoma County, California. And so that was, I think, something that she saw as well in Berkeley, that, you know, there was this, you mentioned the Thatcher, the Reagan era, there was the coming in the 80s, after this whole tumult of the 60s, 70s, in the 80s, there was this kind of 180-degree shift towards materialism and, consumerism and sort of rampant, consumption and luxury and wealth and all of that. And I think that was really disturbing to see a lot of, when you could see the underside of that, which was that so many people were really hurting and starving and not able to make ends meet, So those kind of things all combined, I think, and eventually, when I wanted to be a writer and I tried to be a writer, I wasn't a big success at it. And I started to do yoga because I just was a mess and I kind of just needed some calm, and I started to do yoga. And then it was through the yoga practice that I found this sense of kind of just being okay with things as they were, not having to achieve, not having to chase after things, not having to, push so hard all the time, not having to struggle, because I'd sort of become addicted to the struggle.
Yeah. Oh, let's go there. I'm almost certain that I was addicted to that at some point as well. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because it takes a bit of letting go of that, does, I think. You used yoga. I tried yoga, but it's I'm not consistent enough in that kind of thing. So for me, coaching practices like psychological stuff really work. So like, and I'm still in process of that, of like allowing ease to be in my life, because struggle, like my life is still the same and I'm still the same person. And I actually have more higher levels of generosity and kindness when I'm not in the struggle, because I think sometimes the struggle is really related to deserving.
Mm-hmm.
And then then you have to kind of pit yourself against other people. Like, I deserve it, she doesn't, you do, I did it. And so I try to kind of keep deserving outside of my coaching practice, actually, because I think there's something really insidious about it. Apart from somebody wins an award, it's like, oh my God, you really deserve, that's brilliant, that's a different story. But like, just the idea that just we don't, we have to struggle in order to deserve doesn't feel great to me. But if somebody is super struggling, then I honor that too. But it doesn't mean they deserve anything. They deserve things just because. Because otherwise they may deserve the struggle as well. And then you get into something very sinister. So anyway, what's your take on this?
Oh, that's so rich. A few things. I think the idea of, I think when you're younger, you tend to get more attracted maybe to drama, because it makes you feel alive. That Goo Goo Dolls song, you bleed just to know you're alive. Yes. It's like that. You cut yourself or you bleed so that you can feel something, especially when you've been numb. Through trauma or through other, things that have happened. And I mentioned pushing up against things as a way to grow. So I think I had a lot of trauma that I didn't identify as trauma. So I think that the drama and the being addicted to this kind of, drama was part of that I needed that to feel alive. And then I think what happened was that I failed. I think I had written a novel and I had a great agent, and everything was looking really good for me, and she couldn't sell it. And then it was like, oh, now what? This thing that I've sort of put all the eggs in my basket and gone to school for, I did a master's, that's not going to happen. And that was actually the best thing for me, because the novel was shit. And if I'd published it, it would have probably ruined my so-called writing career, such as it was. And so instead of that, I was forced to kind of go back inside and say, why are you writing? Do you have something meaningful to say? Are you writing because you want to be seen, or you want to be famous, or, this type of thing, which was partly true. And I think we all go through that, especially in our culture of adoration. We want, and especially now, my God, with social media. But that was not going to make a readable novel. And so I think that failure really set me back and caused me to kind of rethink and re-examine and say, okay, if you want to be a writer, what do you want? Do you have anything meaningful to say that anybody should bother to read? If you're going to ask people to spend some hours of their life on reading your work, what is it that you want to say? And I really didn't have anything to say. So I started yoga and I got in my body. I was not in my body. I was not embodied. Everything was out there, and through the practice of yoga and meditation and mindfulness too, things happen in your brain, right? You start, these sort of oxytocin things kick in and you become more calm and you become less addicted to the sort of limbic response, the fight or flight. You get more hooked into the rest and digest response, which is much more self-nurturing as well. So, and then that feeds itself, like that feels good. That starts to feel better than the fight or flight all the time. And as a result of that, these poems came to me. And within my body, there's a city. And this was the first line of the first poem for Downward Dog and yoga poems. So I just started writing these poems. Not because I wanted to publish anything, not because I wanted to be a writer or to be famous, just because they were coming out of the practice.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my first real book. Stonebridge Press of Berkeley published that book. And it was kind of a breakthrough book where, through the practice of being embodied, of being in my body, of being in my breath, of being present in the present moment, not jumping to ahead and judging and all of these things, but just being and allowing this creative force to arise. So that was amazing. And then the other thing that you mentioned about worthiness, I think you mentioned about
deserving things,
deserving,
which probably links in somehow.
Yeah, Tara Brach, who I've just completed a 2-year mindfulness meditation teacher training program with, she and Jack Cornfield, she talks about this thing called the trance of unworthiness, which is something that we all have. We all have this feeling somewhere inside of us of being unworthy of love, unworthy of being loved, unworthy of goodness, and it's a trance. And part of awakening is waking up to the fact that this is a trance, that our true nature is loving and, like you said, unlimited. And that love also can be directed towards ourselves. But part of awakening is waking up to the fact that we're in a trance, and part of that trance is the sense of being unworthy somehow. I just love that. So, and deserving, unworthy, whatever word you might want to call it, I think it's something that women especially, it's a journey that we have to becoming whole, to waking up from that sense of somehow being not enough or not good enough or to this or to that, or, whatever things that we limit ourselves. And I think meditation and yoga and all that just allowed me to just shut all that off. And, remember, there's something bigger. There's something larger than the small self, for all of us. And I think those experiences I had earlier as a child kind of gave me glimpses into that. When I talked about the oneness, hearing Maya Angelou's voice, there were these glimpses into that potential for oneness and for peace and for, reaching beyond this struggle, reaching beyond these individual egos and these individual people trying to be somebody, and just to recognize that we're all part of this giant big flow or this energy. And how do we want to, what energy do we want to generate to put back into that force field, Does that maybe sound a little cosmic, but
no, in terms of systems coaching, we call that the emotional field. And what do we choose into the emotional field between two people? And sometimes I choose, for example, I could do this right now and bring it down and choose to make it a little bit more serious, or I could choose to bring it up and make it a bit more like that. But also what you're talking about is just the way you are, what you bring. There's so much amazing stuff in here. I was interviewing a woman who's an eco-feminist who lives on a farm up in Portland yesterday, and she was talking about how she has radical hope. So even though she's very much on the eco side of things, and we were talking something, and it just reminded me of what you said there. It's like, just to remember. She says, although everything's going to shit in many different ways, I have radical hope, and I have to have radical hope. And that was really useful to me, because, you know, I can be quite nihilistic in some ways, and I like that about myself, because from there comes great comedy. But I'm just great, you know, it's a nice counter to my other super optimistic side, and super kind of like, what can I say, just very positive. Like, I'm generally quite happy, apart from when I'm depressed. So but that's a different story. That's not sad, right? I'm not miserable. So that radical hope thing really helped me there. And this is helping me to put, like, to weave the story together. And then there's 3 things here that you mentioned that I just love. It's like the trance of unworthiness, and the rest and digest piece as well. So it's and the culture of adoration. I was making some kind of connection between these things here, like thinking, like, what is that trance? And the rest and digest piece, I think, is really important to this, because you get back into your body and you understand that part. So important. Yeah, and then the culture of adoration as well. I don't know, it's all obviously it's all connected somehow.
I think one of the things that Tara mentions too is when something happens to us. Let's say we have an experience that's difficult or traumatic or something. You know, we might call that, like in Buddhist terms, the first cut. You know, it's painful. But then what we do is we make a second cut, and that second cut is self-judgment, blame, you know, and we add on to it. And the second cut is actually more damaging than the first cut. The first cut can be healed and worked with, but the second cut is sort of a pattern or a cycle or a trigger that we don't even know that we do. And so when we catch ourselves in the self-blame, rather than being compassionate, okay, this happens to me, what is needed? You know, how can I nurture myself to this experience that happened, rather than the blame, the shame, the, you know, whatever we add on to it. So I think that's how it ties in insofar as that we actually have the ability, you know, Viktor Frankl, he said, right, between stimulus and response, there's a gap. And in that gap, there's a choice. And in the choice, there's freedom. So when something happens to us, before we respond, if we pause, you know, we call it the sacred pause. If we pause, if we take a break, that's when we can get out of that cycle and not go for the second cut. And we can choose, how do I want to respond to this in a loving way, in a kind way, you know, that's not going to add more pain, right? So, and I think the culture of adoration is, again, kind of all of us outside of ourselves wanting to be seen and wanting to be looked at and wanting to be perfect and wanting to, you know, have flawless this and that. And, you know, it's impossible.
Yeah.
And this constant searching for perfection, and, you know, it's just not possible. So that's a lot of suffering right there, you know, as a culture, as a society, as a world now. So if we can understand impermanence, things are not going to last, including our youth, our beauty, our, you know what, it'll be different.
It'll
be different. It'll be different kind of beauty.
Yeah.
Rather than getting fillers and Botox, and, you know, it'll get, I mean, that's fine too, if you want to do that, but it'll be a different kind of beauty. That's a natural way of evolving into who you're becoming. And that's beautiful too. So, but this culture of adoration really sets us up for failure.
Gorgeous. Yeah, amazing. And that, I think that's what I was going to say in the trance of unworthiness, is it feels like we get, you talked about the limbic response there. I feel like we get trapped in the fight, flight, freeze. But in human evolution, that's supposed to be like 10% of the time.
Exactly.
And that sacred pause is not for that. If you see a tiger coming towards you, there's no sacred fucking pause. That's that's fight, fight, or freeze, right? Or fawn. Now we also have the kind of like fawn where we go into the people pleasing because we're triggered, and then we get into that kind of thing as well. So which I recently learned from an embodiment coach whose name is Tada Hoizumi. So but
going back to that point, we're hardwired for that. But in the past, when we were cavemen or cave people, those dangers would pass. The
Yeah,
tiger would come, you'd either get it eaten or you'd eat it.
yeah,
And then it would be over. But now we have this low level, low grade, constant stress. And
yeah,
so we're constantly in the fight flight response, and
amazing.
that's why people get burnt out. That's why they get, things happen to our bodies. That's why we're not healthy. So, because we're in this constant state of adrenaline.
Amazing. And
So
that's
that's why one thing I really embraced and shared in my time in Japan, which I'm so proud of myself, is restorative yoga, which puts people in supportive positions, right? To kick in that rest and digest, to allow the nervous system to calm down so people can regenerate. And oh my gosh, Japan and Tokyo, it was so needed. And in the beginning, when I introduced it, people said, oh, this isn't yoga. You're just lying around on pillows. Ashtanga was the big craze. And all those Japanese men, frankly, who said that, 20 years later, they've all been injured from Ashtanga. They've been injured from yoga practices that were not safe. And now they're all teaching and doing restorative yoga, which they gave me so much shit about in the beginning. Saying, this isn't real yoga. And, and so my point is, if you're called to do something, you just do it. And if people say no, you do it even harder, because there's something there. You trust your instinct, you trust yourself. So when I opened my studio, I knew I wanted to do restorative yoga. So I had all these bolsters shipped over because there was nothing in Japan. And that was what I started to do. 20 years later, I trained thousands of people all over Japan, and they've gone into their communities to offer this type of yoga. I'm very happy. I feel like that's a legacy that I'm so proud of, talking about legends, right? The legacies. So for me, that legacy is, I think, the thing that I'm the most proud of is just having taught that practice to people who went back into their communities to share that with young and old and inflexible. And, anybody can do that type of yoga.
Love it. Yeah, I'm a big fan of that kind of thing, and yin yoga as well.
Yeah.
I love it. Yes, so it's really, I just wanted also to mark for listeners that we also talk about, you called it the first cut and the second cut. And in Gretchen Miura's interview, she called it the first arrow and second arrow, which I'm sure you all, yeah. And we talked about that in the context of grieving death, and how she dealt with the second arrow after the death of her brother. And I actually spoke to one of my clients about this last night as well. And so we were saying, right, we're just going to burn the second arrow and try and focus on the first arrow, not for something super grievous, because I can't do that stuff, not super traumatic. It was something very simple. Very simple. Because I'm not a therapist, so I don't go deep into the trauma things. And the rest and digest, I mean, it's just brilliant, isn't it? Like, yeah, we shouldn't be in that fight, flight, freeze all the time. And I'm sure that I lived it for many years and wasted a lot of time on it, which is fine because it's part of who I am now, but I refuse it now. That's what I always say to myself. I refuse this. I refuse it. And I look at the photograph of myself 10 years ago talking about being useful. I look better now. I better now.
Yeah, I think with, just becoming comfortable with ourselves, there is a natural beauty that emerges from that. Agreed. And a confidence, and
yeah, I agreed. So tell me more then about, so I just want to very quickly, what did you study when you went to university?
English literature and Japanese literature.
Amazing. Yeah. And so how did you get to, so we've already said you have this yoga studio that's still in play. In fact, some of my friends did a workshop there this week called Sun and Moon Yoga. So you've already mentioned that, but I'm interested to know, how did you, so you graduated and you're already writing at this point. How did you get to Japan and what happens next?
Yeah, so again, I never had any money because I was a writer and I was very determined to be a writer. And so when I went to graduate school at San Francisco State University, which was an amazing program, Stan Rice was there. Anne Rice, his wife, who wrote all of the vampire novels, they were there. And Michael Rubin was my teacher. And then I graduated and I majored in creative writing as a master's, but I did a minor in Japanese literature with a a Japanese woman who was there. And I graduated from that program, and I got a job teaching right away at the program, which was highly unusual and a good job. But I had a boyfriend at the time who was very ambitious, very brilliant, and he got a Fulbright scholarship to come to Japan to study medical ethics. So I was torn because I thought, oh God, I've finally got a job. It's a good job. And yet he's got this great opportunity. And I really wanted to go to Japan. And I had $500 to my name. So I knew I'd never get there. And so I decided to teach for a semester and then to go with him. And so that's what I did. I went with him with $500 in my pocket. I applied for lots of English teaching jobs, which I did through, English schools. And I went to lots of companies and taught, riding packed trains at 6 a.m. And serendipitously, I was at a bookstore, and I worked for University of Hawaii's literary magazine, Manawa, writing book reviews, and they were trying to get distribution. So I went to MaraZen, and I was trying to find out how to get that literary magazine distributed there. And this man came up to me and said, are you a writer? You want to help? And we just started chatting, and it turned out he was quite famous literary critic and professor at Todai, Tokyo University, called Moto Yuki Shibata, and translator. And we became friends. And then he sort of offered me a job. He said, hey, you've got a master's, why don't you come teach at Todai? And I said, I don't think I can do that. And he said, why not? You've got a master's, you know how to write, you know how to speak English, you can. And I said, because it's Todai. And he said, yeah, well, I'm inviting you, and I'm the head of the department. So it was just crazy that I just sort of, by coincidence, quote unquote, met this guy at a bookstore. And so I ended up teaching English literature, American literature, and basic grammar at Todai, but it was a joke because a lot of the students, their grammar was far better than mine. And my boyfriend at the time, we broke up, and he went back to America, and I stayed. And I didn't really plan on being an expat forever there. And, and then I met Shogo. I met him at a jazz bar.
That's your husband?
Who's my husband, yeah. And I met him, and I thought he was amazing, but I had decided to leave Japan by that point. And I said, listen, I really like you, but I'm done with Japan. I felt like I was taught for a few years at Todai. I was writing for the Japan Times regularly. I met Donald Ritchie, who had become a mentor to me, and I was editing his journals. I felt like I'd sort of done what I wanted to do in Japan. And Shogo very wisely said, well, listen, if you're not happy here, you're not going to be happy with me. So you should go back to the States. And if you're, we're meant to be together, we will be. And I was kind of shocked. I'd never had anybody be so trusting and sort of, it's your life, do what you want, And so I left, and he followed, he came. He packed up his life. He'd never even lived abroad. He'd been to Europe once with his dad when he was 18. And we lived in California for 10 years. And that's when I started the yoga journey.
Okay. So I just want to, just for any listeners who are outside Japan, MaraZen is a publishing company in Japan, is that right?
It's a bookstore.
A bookstore.
It's a big, huge bookstore, yeah. And also a department store, and yeah.
Okay, and Todai is Tokyo University, which stands for Tokyo Daigaku, which is like Oxford or Harvard, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a top school, and all the kids want to get in there. And
yeah,
so to meet somebody like that in a bookstore was just, and then have a job offered to me. And it was a kind of a really pivotal moment for me too, because it was when I came to Japan, it was the first time that I could actually make money as a writer, based on my creative writing degree. My master's, which was worthless in the States, was actually worth something in Japan. And that was very empowering for me too, because I had not had much support from my family or parents for being on the path that I was on. Yeah. And for the first time in my life, I had financial independence. So that was huge.
Yeah, amazing.
But then I left that behind, and we moved to California, and Shogo and I lived there for 10 years, and we worked as freelance translator. He worked for Apple and IBM, and he got some great jobs, and we've got a great gig at Lucasfilm, at Skywalker Ranch, doing translation for some Star Wars archives, and it was awesome. But then there came a point when, once again, America went into war. It was 2003, and America started, went into war in Afghanistan. And Shoko said, I don't like where this is going. I think I want to go back to Japan. And it was after 9/11. So 9/11, 2001, right?
Yeah.
And you couldn't, so my passport had expired, which I hadn't realized. And I couldn't get one right away. So he came to Japan back by himself to visit his dad. And then when he came back to California, he said, I think I want to move back to Tokyo. And I thought, I didn't really want to be honest. I had a nice life in Northern California. We lived on the beach, a town of 100 people, kind of like where you're living. And the thought of moving back to Tokyo just did not appeal to me. But I remembered I had gone on a yoga retreat in Hawaii, and I was sitting in meditation, and I heard this voice saying, you need to go back to Tokyo and open a yoga studio. And that was exactly my response. I was like, what? Go away, shut up, I don't want to hear this. I have no intention of going back to Tokyo nor opening a business there. And so years went by, and then when this happened, and he said, are you going to come with me? And I thought, well, he'd been 10 years in America with me. I thought it was only fair for me to go back to Japan with him. So I said, okay, I'll give you 10 years there. You can tell where that went, right? Yeah. What am I going to do there? I couldn't go back to, I was smoking and drinking and being a writer. I got the, the Bloomsbury. I thought I was, I didn't like that lifestyle anymore. And I was older, and I wanted a healthy lifestyle. And then I remembered, oh, wait, I think I'm supposed to open a yoga studio, because I got this guidance. And he said, I said, do you think I can do that? And he said, well, let's see. And so we sort of Googled, and Google, it just happened then. It was 2003. There was only 1 or 2 yoga studios in Tokyo. And he said, you know what, let's try it. And if you can't do it, we'll know that then. And so we had flipped a house. We bought an old house that we fixed up, and we were able to make some money. And then when we came back to Japan, we used that money to open the yoga studio, and I sent all the props because I loved restorative yoga. And the first few months, I opened the studio and nobody came. And I was like, holy shit, I made a huge mistake. This was a way, put all my money in here, and nobody came. And then I kind of had this moment where I realized that I hadn't arrived. This is what we were talking about before. Like, I was waiting for everyone else to come, but I myself had not arrived in the space. So I pulled out my yoga mat, and I just started practicing, and I started honoring the space and honoring my feet on the ground here, everything that's got me to this point. I arrived in my space, and I honored the space. I blessed the space, but it took me 2 months to realize, because I kept waiting for, where are my students? Where are my students? And and then I went to Few, yay Few. And I stood up and I said, hey, everybody, I'm Leza. I've just opened a yoga studio. Please come. And the woman next to me, Catherine, shout out to Catherine, said, oh, I've been waiting for you. She was a lawyer at the time, and now she's a yoga teacher, but she was a lawyer. And she said, I'm coming. And she came every day. She was my student for like the next month, and nobody else. And then the phone rang, and it was Okamura Takashi, who had a show called 99 Sides. He's a famous comedian, the little guy. And he said, or his producers or somebody were like, hey, he wants to come to your yoga studio and do yoga with you, and you'll be on this comedy show. And I didn't have a TV, and I didn't know who he was. And I said, sure, that sounds like fun. Comedy, yoga, okay, whatever. And Sarah Shivani, who you might know.
Yes, I do know her, yeah.
She came along, and she was quite fluent in Japanese. So she was sort of my foil, and the two of us just had a blast with him, and we laughed, and we put him in restorative yoga poses, and they had these cue cards for me where I was supposed to say things in Japanese, but it was written in Romaji, but it was like incorrect.
Yeah.
And it was something like I was supposed to say kimochi desu yo, which means like, oh, it feels good, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But the cards were written incorrectly. And like kimochi daru, or so, and I wasn't sure, should I say what's on the card? So I just read what's on the card, and it was hysterical. And people came up to me afterward and said, we've never seen a yoga teacher like that who could laugh and make fun of themselves. Because in Japan, the yoga teachers were literally on pedestals.
Okay.
And they were serious, and they were the sensei. And, people just start flocking to my studio. People would stop me on the street and say, oh, you're the yoga teacher. I say, oh my gosh, now I can't eat and walk, like I have to be very careful how I am in public.
Yeah.
But it was just amazing how just arriving in the space first of all, recognizing that I was waiting once again externally to be validated, and just taking the reins and saying, okay, nobody's coming. Nobody is coming. You are coming to your own life. You open the door to your own life. And that's what I did. And it was like that moment when I was a teenager when I realized nobody is going to make your life for you. You've got to make it yourself. You've got to take those steps. So it was that same, but only, 20, 30 years later. And then the universe supported that. So it was just amazing. And then that the rest is history. The studio is now coming into its 19th year. Even though I'm no longer there, we have so many great teachers. Shout out to M. Bettinger for keeping the place going, and Toshiko and my husband Shogo, who Toshiko does all the administrative stuff. Shogo does all of the logistical things and the bookkeeping and all that. So it really takes a village, and we have so many great teachers. We have so many great students. And the beautiful thing is we've been in business now for almost 20 years. So we've had people who've met at the studio, who've gotten together, who've started their own families, quite a few actually.
Yeah.
And now we have second, generation son and moon kids who are yogis. So, and then I have my own child too, who came when I was 44. So that's a whole other conversation.
Wow.
Yeah.
44. Yeah. That's
So
I didn't realize you were 44 when your son came along.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was something too, like I really wanted to experience in my life. I didn't feel like I was missing anything, or I didn't feel incomplete in some way. But what they say, like at the end of your life, you will look back and regret the things that you didn't do. And it was something in my mind, like, I want to have the experience of being a mother. Like, I think this is something I'm going to regret if I don't try it.
Yeah.
Now in hindsight, oh my God, what was I thinking? But, I decided to try to pursue that and see if it would happen. And then if it didn't happen, knowing that I'd taken it, as far as I could, then I would be okay with that too. But I did feel that there was something that needed to be explored there. And then as I wrote about in In Search of the Sun, my memoir, I kept hearing this voice of a child calling to me. Like literally I would hear this voice of a child kind of waiting for me, calling to me. So then it sort of became a search for him. Like, who is this child? Where is he? And can I find him? Can I sort of cut through time and space, and whoever this soul is calling me, find this person, and that became this incredible journey.
And he found you. How many years ago is that now? Lisa, sorry, I'm going to give your age out now, but who cares?
Yeah, no, it's okay.
I'm 50 this year, so
14.
Yeah.
So I'm 58. Yeah, no, I'm happy to be alive. And the other thing
too. What a privilege. What an honor to be extending our lives out. I feel so full. Anyway, but so he's 14 now.
Well, he's almost 16.
He's almost 16, and this was 14 years ago that he arrived in your life, having kind of through the ether been calling to you. What do you think was the kind of, you mentioned the word cosmic earlier, so let's jump into that area. What do you think was the cosmic reason that he was brought to you?
Well, I think people come in our lives to help us evolve and to help us, kind of manifest our potential and our gifts and our, what we're put here to do. And sometimes they're difficult people, they're challenging, fierce people, as you mentioned. And, sometimes they're more easeful relationships, but I think for whatever, we have things to learn from each other. And I feel like this child clearly is a very strong personality and an amazing person and very strong personality. So I woke up to one morning and I was living with him and my husband's father, and all three of them are extremely strong, stubborn Japanese men. How am I living in a white foreign woman living with three really stubborn, strong, powerful Japanese men? And one friend said to me, it's because one of you is equal to three of them. You know, like you can handle them. They may not be able to handle you, but you were there because they've got things to learn from you. You've got things to learn from them. And I really do believe that, you know.
What's the biggest lesson he's taught you?
Oh, patience.
Ooh.
I was not a very patient person. Empathy and compassion. I mean, one of my things I love teaching at Sun and Moon is metta, loving kindness meditation, and compassion. And this child has pushed me in so many different ways to be more patient, to be more compassionate, and also to be strong and to, you know, set boundaries and stand up for myself, and, you know, continually, you know, like, well, I still have to do this. Yes, you do. You know, it's especially as a teenager. So anybody who's ever had a you know, challenging teenager, and I myself was one, so karmically it's not much of a surprise that I get one. Yeah. Right. And I also think to really appreciate my own mother. So shout out to my mom, Donna Mendelsohn, you know, to appreciate my mother and what she struggled with and how she always insisted that we get an education. And, you know, that was the most important thing to her, that we, the three of us girls, that we be educated and that we be independent. And, you know, one of my sisters is an amazing artist. The other is a doctor, you know, that we each kind of found our path and believed in that. And, you know, yeah, so I feel like I had things still to learn about maybe appreciating my own mother, appreciating all mothers. You know, we all are mothers, whether you have a biological child or not, whether your child is biological or not. You know, we all, women and men too, I think, have the capacity to have that nurturing energy, and that it's something the world really, really needs right now. So he was my kind of, you know, baptism by fire in that. Like, okay, you want to be a mother? You know, be careful what you wish for, really. Like, it's not so easy. It's not an easy job. And I have so much respect for mothers now.
Yeah,
you know?
sure. Yeah, I love that. We're all mothers. I mean, I emphatically chose not to have children. Like, that's not something that that's not going to be one of my deathbed regrets. If I transport myself into the future and use my imagination. However, when I was doing my systems coaching training, we had to find a positive secret self that lives inside of us, and mine was mother, actually. And following that, I brought that much more to the table, and I'm very glad that I was able to discover, like, and bring more of that part of myself to the table. It's really, really interesting.
Totally see that. And I think you mother a lot of people through your coaching and through even this work that you're doing right now. I mean, they're different. There's so many different ways to be a mother.
100%, you know? Absolutely. There's no shame there. And yeah, I love it. And I'm everybody's favorite auntie. So this is, and I'm going to be doing that today as well.
Yeah, auntie too. I had an amazing aunt who was so instrumental in my life as well. And, you know, aunties are mothers, you know. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's just so many different ways to do that. So many different ways to lead a life, isn't there? And like, everybody needs that eccentric auntie who's like, yeah, go for your life with all the sugary drinks in the free bar. And then later they're like, Auntie Sarah, I don't think you should have let me have all the sugary drinks. I feel really sick. Okay, on you go.
On you go. Was the marijuana in the shoebox. Go ahead, have a joint. Mine was that auntie, you know.
That might have been who I was 30 years ago, but not now. Definitely
well,
not.
You have the sugary drinks, so
Well, oh
But
no,
yeah,
I mean, I would actually not do that anymore. But like, you know, I was always like, say 10 years ago, be that like, go on you go. You choose, you decide. Yay, they're like just amazing. And then they learn very quickly that was not a good idea.
yeah, totally.
Cool. There was just a really small thing that I'd love people to, that I just want to pick up on here, which is about, because we haven't really kind of talked about the cross-cultural stuff, and I don't want to go there, but this is something I want to flag for listeners. You said, and then I couldn't eat and walk. And I think one thing that I'm noting now about living in a different culture in a different country is to be really mindful about the rules and regulations of that place so that you can play within them. So I think you and I are both kind of rebels within this, but that's just a really simple thing, is like, it's really taboo, it's really against etiquette to eat and walk in. Now, of course we all do it, like, so to walk along and eat, but and I can remember the very first job I got here, I was told never eat and walk, because you don't know if any of the, when I first got here, I was a kindergarten teacher, you don't know if any of the parents can see you in any of the places you are. And if they see you doing that, it just sends out really bad signals. And, you know, I'm a rebellious Northern England woman who doesn't like authority. So I might be like, that's ridiculous. Why would I do that? Onigiri are meant to be, you know, rice balls are meant to be eaten, you know, but actually, as the more I'm more relaxed and enjoy myself more when I follow the rules and regulations in Japan, because then I know how to color outside of them as well. And you can, and there's an awful lot of freedom within them. And that I think is just also kind of slightly decolonizing my mind as well, to be
Yeah,
open,
I think that's a
not just
really
kind
good
of
point.
bulldozing my way in and trying to change everything, but actually going, okay, now I'm here, this is where I live, I'm going to look after it. So that was something that really, really resonated with me when you said that. It's so tiny and people may not even have picked up on it, but it just shows that respect. And I think we'd be incredibly successful within that. Is there anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's a really good word, respect. I think being respectful of the culture, of the way of life, of the mindset, and kind of abiding by things that are important, just to signify that you do respect the culture, you know. And then there are other ways to rebel. So I have this yoga studio where I could do Leza, and you could do Sarah, and people could do themselves. So I created a kind of a bubble, or we co-created, I feel the community co-created this bubble where people could be themselves, which was why it was so successful. You know, the people could come in, and the minute you walk in, you knew you could be yourself there. You would be accepted for you all. You didn't have to be anybody different. But I feel like Japan, one of the things that it did teach me was discipline and was respect, and, you know, kind of to get over myself, that I was never going
Yes.
to change Japanese society, but I could change myself and how I responded to it in subtle ways,
Yeah.
and create a space where people could be authentic within, you know, find what worked for them in the society, and what didn't work for them, dispense with that. So I feel like that was a big learning process for me, having a partner who was so amazing and supportive of me, and you know,
Same.
didn't expect me to be different, and didn't want me to change, was really freeing as well. And not having to change myself, and not you know, wanting him to change either. So I'm really grateful to Japan for helping me to become this person as well. And then, ironically, out of all that, I became a writer. You know, I was able to publish books. I published. We had this big tsunami and earthquake in 2011, and I went up to volunteer in the Tohoku, and I met a young boy who reminded me of my son, and he said, "Bokutachi wa soranai de kudasai," which means "Don't forget about us."
Oh God, yeah.
And I thought, oh, what can I do? And my friend said, well, you're a writer. Why don't you write about it? That's a great way to keep a light shining on that area. And so I eventually ended up doing that. And that book was published by Random House. So that was, to me, kind of a pinnacle, the biggest publisher in the world, having that book published by them, and then being able to, I donated the money. Carolyn Pover, who I'm sure you know, started all of these volunteer projects up in Tohoku, and has written a book about it now. And one of the projects was a library. So it was just so wonderful, going back to the idea of seva. to have written this book and then to be able to use the profits from that to bring it back to the community, to build a library so kids could read and have a safe place. So it was kind of by letting go of the dream to be a writer for the wrong reasons, perhaps. And then, doing the yoga, getting embodied, being in a community, giving to the community, having that. And then when this disaster happened, to kind of naturally feel called, well, what can I do? And this kid to say to me, I always get really emotional,
Oh, me
please
too.
don't forget.
I'm just thinking about it now. Yeah.
And to be able to use my writing in that way to be of service was really, really fulfilling. So I feel like, you really have to let go of your agenda sometimes and just let the universe use you in ways that are meaningful, and just trust. That's a radical hope, radical trust, and radical love, really. I mean, I think everything I did in Japan was from love. Like, I wanted to give back to these people that had helped me so much and had given me so much. So
agreed. And as we're coming up to the 10-year anniversary of that, I can feel my heart starting to twitch already. Like, I was just thinking about it then, like, it's coming up for 10 years in 2 weeks time since that. And I can already talking about being embodied, I can feel my body starting to wake up to that whole thing. And I don't know what's going to happen, but what I do want to ask on a very practical front, Leza, is what's your book's name about that?
So that is a young adult novel. It's all written in verse. It's one long poem, and it's called Up from the Sea.
Up from the Sea. Oh, oh no.
And and I've also been really honored to, have done dozens of school visits all over the world to talk about this book and the events and how people came together. The book is really about how people came together from all over the world to help these communities. So even though it was a horrible tragedy and 15,000 people plus passed away, people came together and they helped people, they helped strangers, and these incredible acts of kindness. So that's really what the book celebrates. It's based on true stories of people, woman finding a soccer ball in Alaska and returning it to a kid who had lost it in Mikuzen Takata up on the coast. And, just small things like that. She could have just kept on walking, but she found it in Alaska. A Japanese woman. What's a Japanese woman doing on this remote stretch of beach in Alaska? And she found the soccer ball with names written on it. And she realized this must be from the tsunami. It must be important. And rather than just walking on by, she and her husband went to the trouble of tracking down this child and returning the ball. I mean, so stories like that I wove into the novel. It's about a boy who lost his mother, and he's based on the boy that I met when I was there. So life is mysterious.
A lot of emotion and a lot of embodied stuff that's seeing kind of coming up to the surface in those people like you and I and the whole of Japan who had that shared experience as well. But that's a whole other conversation. I think I don't want to start that right now because we need to start to land this. But that was an event, and just sending massive love up to all the people up there who are still suffering so badly.
And to know, one person can make a difference. You can do something to make a difference. You can go up and volunteer. You can write a book. You can talk about it. You can, we went up there to volunteer. We gave massage. And as a foreign woman, the only Westerner up there, I wondered, these people have been through this horrible experience. Are they going to be open to somebody like me touching them or offering? And they were just so happy that people cared. That was the bottom line. They were happy that the world cared, because they felt that they had been not cared for. So that was such a moving experience for me as well. And to see some friends of mine in Tokyo that come together and back to M. Bettinger, we had big drives at the yoga studio that she and her husband Phil arranged, and people donated massive amounts of stuff. So we were the largest non-corporate donor of supplies up to Tohoku for that year. because of really of Em and her husband Phil and all of the people who, donated supplies and money and, through this yoga studio. So it was really nice to be able to do just a small thing like that, but it makes a difference.
That's a lovely, lovely thing. What a legacy as well. So I think it's time for us to land this conversation now, Leza. So currently you're based in California, is that right?
I'm actually not in California, I'm in New Mexico.
In New Mexico, and you're there for your son's education, is that right?
Yep.
Is he a big sportsman? Is he a big sportsman?
He is a big soccer player.
Okay, so that's why you're over there, is it?
Yeah, and to give him the opportunity to experience my culture, my language. He's been in Japan his whole life. He wanted to learn English, just to have that balance.
Yeah, so to get in touch with the American side of the family. And so what's next for you then? What are you doing? I mean, obviously you're one of my favorite words is devotion. So you're devoted to your son and you're devoted to that family. And and your husband's still in Japan.
Right.
So for anybody who lives outside of Japan, this may seem radical, but actually if you live in Japan, then there's lots of different ways that people do their nuclear family. People are often in different places and stuff like that. It's just not based on the Western model.
I know a lot of people are so shocked, but what's happened to your marriage? And I said, we're fine, we're right. Peace there.
Yeah.
But I still have several books I'm working on. I still teach yoga and mindfulness. I still have the yoga studio. I still do teacher trainings, but my main focus right now is supporting my son through high school here. And but I have such a strong love and connection for Japan that I will be back. And I have my Sun and Moon is still open, and I'm still teaching there online now. And also I will go back, as these COVID restrictions lift, I'll be able to go back more and offer more teacher trainings and workshops and be more close to the people I love there. So I miss Japan. I really do miss it. I'm very happy to be here right now for him and for myself as well. I needed a bit of a break. I think it's good to shake yourself up.
Yeah.
So more writing, more yoga, more mindfulness, and we'll see. Yeah, I mean, I feel like part of my heart is in Japan, and I've invested a lot of time and energy in learning the language, and I have so many deep relationships there that will always be a part of me as well. So,
yeah, lovely. So, what books? What if you were to recommend 3 of your books? So, I'm going to recommend Up from the Sea. What was the other one you mentioned? Your memoir is called
In Search of the Sun.
In Search of the Sun.
Yeah.
If there was another one from your canon, what would you choose to highlight?
I think I was looking on my shelf to see if I have a copy up here. I think probably yoga poems.
Yoga poems.
Okay, so here's one. It's called Yoga Heart.
Yeah.
Oh, it's in there, which is about the 6 perfections of Buddhism, like you mentioned, kindness and generosity and patience and joyful effort and stillness.
Yeah.
So can I read a poem? I'm just going to open to the page.
Oh my God, I'm glad I've got a tissue.
I don't know. I'm just open to
Is there any parting words? Is there any parting words? And so this is just perfect. Please do.
Okay.
So we're going to have a live poem now read by Leza from her book. Which book is this one? Yoga Heart or Yoga Poems?
So this is called Yoga Heart.
Yeah.
And it's based on the 6 perfections of Buddhism.
Who did that shodo? The on the front.
Thank you. This is Akiko Tanimoto, who was one of my students, who did this beautiful art throughout the book. Yeah. Look at this yoga. And she was one of my students. And I put out a call, I think, on Facebook saying, hey, I need a calligrapher to do the art for my book. And she said, oh, well, my teacher is this master. And I said, how about you? Forget about your teacher. How about you? And she sent these beautiful drawings of, you know, very Japanese fireflies and teapots and dragonflies and things like that. And the publisher said, why don't you take this tsuboku, this Japanese, you know, brushwork, and do yoga figures? And it was radical. Look at this. It's a lunge.
Oh, it's so amazing.
And
I
so she
love it.
created this new form, you know, out of her yoga practice, out of being at the studio. And this is another thing. This is child's pose. Look at that.
Oh my God, that's so beautiful. But Leza, again, it's that sense of, she's like, oh, I have a teacher, and you're like, no, you get to be the master now. So you get to elevate her in the same way that your mentor elevated you. Beautiful, unbelievable.
Absolutely.
I love
And that, you know, has been such a great joy for me. And the thing I love probably even more than teaching yoga is helping people to, you know, manifest their potential. And
yeah.
So this poem is called Grace.
Grace.
Perhaps a feeling of relief washes over you, the way you unexpectedly see the face of someone you love in a crowd. Maybe a prayer fills your heart as you sit in the midst of your crowded life, welcoming the empty space. This is your daily work, to live this life as if she's there, just over your shoulder, an angel, weightless in her wings, breaking open the sky at your back.
Oh, gorgeous.
That's
Thank you
Grace.
so much.
That's Grace.
Gorgeous. Thank you so much. And it's good to know I've got access to Grace just over my shoulder. So with great grace, I honor you today. And thank you so much, Leza, for joining us today and sharing your one of the many, many ways to lead lives, and also the stories of the other people in your life. It's just, I really, really do more and more believe that these conversations, these legends, because that's what a legend is. It's actually a story that may or may not be true, told by somebody who's a great, you know, in the retelling, if we did this again, different stories would come out, and they'd come out in different ways. So that's why I call it the Legends series, which is terribly bold, isn't it? But this is just about those kind of myths and legends that are born out of people leading their lives in so many different and interesting and unique ways, which is every single life. And so I just kind of pluck out the ones that again, that little voice that goes, now's the time to contact Leza, or, oh, I wonder, she looks interesting, and contacting people, and just, or he looks interesting, and just contacting people and seeing if they're willing to have these conversations recorded, because, you know, we have a lot of the written word. There's a lot of, you know, how-to podcasts out there. And I kind of want to give the texture and the richness to my coaching through these stories, rather than teaching coaching through a podcast. And I'm so grateful to you for having come here today and let us share your story, Leza. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm really grateful to you. This is brilliant, and I just am in awe of what you do and how you do it. And please keep doing what you're doing. It's just such a service. So thank you.
Thank you, Leza. I appreciate you. And thank you, everybody, for listening or watching. Where can we find you, Leza? Is it lezalowitz.com, or where would you like to find you?
Yeah, LEZALOWITZ.com, or sunandmoon.jp if you want yoga, meditation, mindfulness. Yeah.
Or just, we'll drop that into the comments. Thank you so much, and see you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.